Alright, looks like I'm making a video and such. Yeah, that's as far as I'll go. Hythloday response video, really useless smush. I did make an hour-long reply video to his philosophy video. Unfortunately, computer didn't record the sound, and sort of annoying, very. But you know, shit happens. So I'll do that in the future, put it on the Amendum channel, I guess. I was going to just do it as a website video, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a simple argument. And they're all come down to some sort of simple. The difference, ironically, me and Hythloday probably agree on 98% of what might be statements made about reality, and the differences are in just these fundamental things where he just gets something so fundamental wrong and just breaks the whole game. It gets the kernel, the starting point broken. And clearly I think that's happening in this physics argument. He's just glued to some idea that it can't be simple. And I don't know why he's glued to it, but he's glued to it. And so it just becomes, he just won't accept an explanation that's simple. Period. Alright, so let's play this rubbish of a video. And it was just rubbish. I really have made a deliberate effort to use simple jargon, make things really understandable. You can't honestly paraphrase anything I've said ever. And you're just like, how can you fuck this up? It's not that complicated. And even the idea of a tipping point and how it has to be on resonance, and how if the energy goes in the wrong way, it'll destroy the ability of the energy to be saved in the system, to be reflected, and to stay in the system. And I've made all these arguments. So how can you turn that into something else? And he turns it into something else. It's just an amazing, saying that I'm predicting something else. He actually says I'm predicting that the speed of light increases, can go faster than light. I never said any such thing, ever. I've always said the same thing. The photons always travel the same speed. They can't be made to go faster or slower. I've said it so overtly. Obviously, if two things are moving towards each other and they're shooting light at each other, the light, just as a practical matter, is going to be shot from their closer distance, not their further distance. So you have to recognize that some of the light they shoot will be from here, and then some of the light they shoot will be from here. And the photons from here, aren't going to take as long to get to the other guy as the photons shot from here. Just a fact. It's a longer distance. Duh. But he says I should do the experiment. Oh, so I should make myself a spaceship that travels half the speed of light and shoot a flashlight off of it. I mean, just, this is just such crap. Especially in light of the fact that I have in all these videos, he keeps giving me advice on what I should do and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I've put them in a playlist called Subjects. And in all these videos, I'm saying, go ahead, show me the evidence countering anything I'm saying. Show me. Link me to a piece of fucking evidence. Link me to a simpler, more complete explanation. No such thing happens. I mean, just such bullshit.
Is it Chronicles of Riddick, where they talk about the Underverse? I like the word. It imbues a kind of a sense in which the real mechanics of reality will always be hidden from us. But
so again, an assumption. In a sense, yes, the real mechanics, so to speak, in terms of getting an exact picture, but we can certainly model the real mechanics, and that's all we really need is a model, because the real mechanics are going to be simple. They're going to be like dominoes flipping. We don't have to see the actual dominoes to understand dominoes flipping and to draw a picture of dominoes flipping. So this is, again, kind of a whatever, as if we can't find the truth. No, we can find accurate statements and accurate descriptions and accurate drawings. We can do that.
if that mechanics is to behave in a common sense way, in a information conservative.
Well, that's just idiotic. Common sense and then information conservative. So again, he's bought into some notion that this has something to do with information conservation. It's just a silly notion. It's just silly jargon. There's no information conservation. There is a fact that it's cause and effect. All right, you can't get to certain effects without having certain causes. You can't bake a cake without flour and sugar and all the stuff you have to put in to bake cakes. You can't bake a cake out of dog shit. So, yeah, the fact that there's a distinct limitation, that the previous conditions decide what the possibilities for the next condition is just a fact. That has nothing to do with information, though. It's not, the information doesn't mean anything. The fact that there are actual circumstances that have to pre-exist a certain next circumstance, again, you can't break a leg unless you have a leg to break. I mean, the fact that there's that connection between the information, the realities are connected, it has nothing to do with information. It has to just do with physical cause and effect, and it's a chain. It's a chain of causes and effects. That notion of cause and effect being a chain, a linked chain, has been around for a long time, and that's all you need to understand, is that cause and effect is a linked chain. You don't need to play stupid idiotic games with your stupid little information word as if there's something called information in the universe. It's just bullshit. It's just a dodge from the reality. It's not a more accurate way to describe reality. It's a less accurate way to describe reality.
Conservative way, if it's to yield a sensible universe with our mathematical notions of symmetry.
Yeah, well, it's not even just symmetry. We have mathematical, we have rational notions of cause and effect, again, and that it's always going to be circumstantial, and there's nothing caused by a spontaneous, and there's nothing caused by a random, a pure random. There's nothing caused by a nothing. It's always a something leads to a something. Something doesn't come from nothing.
Which give conservation of conservation of energy, conservation of angular momentum, and so on. And then those.
Yes, conservation of any momentum. They're not just angular, any momentum. Momentum is conserved, right? That's all you have to know, is that there's a rule that says you have to conserve the fact that something's moving distance. Now, whether or not there's a law that says changes in momentum require extra momentum, I would argue not. That all they require is the cause and effect interactions, and the interactions have rules, simple rules.
Mathematical insights of logic.
So again, this math, this obsession with mathematical, math is just formulas. It's just a formalization of effects again. We happen to be watching the same video series. I'm only like on the 9th one or whatever. And it's called the Mechanical Universe, Southern California, 1980s. Educational content. Dramatically done, not necessarily, but the physics isn't bad. But yeah, it's all focused on math and equations, but they're simple. The equations aren't. They were written by Newton, a lot of them, written hundreds of years ago. Calculus was invented. It's not some sort of magical thing. And it's certainly not anything that does any real predicting of anything. It's a description of what they see. It's not a description of why they see it. It's a description of the relationships between, yes, your height, okay, and distance, and the forces, and I mean, it's just diagramming you variables that affect outcomes. Here's the variables, here's the outcomes. That's all the math is, okay? This glorification of it is just such coarse crap, as if there's something called quantum math. There's no quantum mechanics math. The math is for every circumstance they write a new formula. They change the variables for every circumstance. The single slit, the double slit, they change what the variables are.
Constrain that underverse and mean that it must be.
Sorry. The quality of his video is rather poor, and being transcribed through the speakers here and everything else, and accelerating the speed. So when there's an important point, I'll just re-articulate it.
Mechanical. But that mathematics is an abstraction from logic and truth.
Well, again, it's not an abstraction. There's nothing abstract about 2 plus 2 equals 4. So let's not pretend it's 2ness plus 2ness equals 4ness. There's nothing abstract. It's a rational, it's well correlated to the reality, and much mathematics is well correlated to reality. Now, some mathematics is completely bullshit, abstract nonsense, but a lot of math isn't. Vector math isn't irrational. It's perfectly rational. It's perfectly rational geometry put into just mathematical form.
Of what must be when there is existence that is logical, reasonable, conservation of, and gives conservation of information.
So again, more just conservation of information. Like, because Susskind said this shit, they all fall for it. I don't know why. It's just a silly. Again, it's not being more descriptive. It's not being more explicit. It's not doing anything better. It's far worse than just saying there's a chain of cause and effect links. That is a more descriptive statement about reality than this stupid word information. It means it's just mumbo jumbo. Garbage, nonsense, silly baby talk.
And created out of nothing, things can't disappear into nothing. All things must be accounted for. That's
right. Yes, except in physics, where they play this game where they can borrow from vacuums, give back to the future, borrow from the past, and then all this jargon about annihilation events that aren't really annihilations. I mean, just pretend that their physics isn't just full of jargon and nonsense. And when it's full of jargon and nonsense.
Kind of the principle of conservation of information.
I said it again, 3 times. Silly, as if a rational person sits there and thinks that there's this thing called information in the reality, that somehow the battery is more about being information than being. No, it's made of material that had to be mined somewhere, and then the metal jacket, the whole thing had to be put together, material from different places. And the material got on the Earth from different suns that supernovaed in different locations, and we had to synthesize it and do all these. That's not information. That's a history. That's all it is. There's a history to all these atoms. All these atoms were somewhere 500 years ago. Every single one of these atoms was somewhere 500 years ago on this planet. They were somewhere on this planet. Doing something, sitting somewhere going, I'm an atom of lithium, That's what was happening. It's not information. It's just a fact that over the cycle of time, this thing was in different places. That's all. It's nothing to do with information.
What has happened is that we have got too married to the principles and tried to put real metaphor, that's an oxymoronic perhaps, but
yeah, this is just idiotic. So he's saying somehow physics is too married to a particle theory or a simple description of reality, when obviously for the last 100 years they've been too married to just idiotic made-up notions of reality, so the vacuous explanations, bent space, spooky actions all over the place, virtual photons, no continuity, no mechanics to it at all. There's no physics. There's nothing physical in their physics. Okay, it's all just mathematical crap. And again, the mathematics isn't even that complicated. It isn't even marginally sophisticated in a sense. It's just geometry and algebra. It's just defining the height, width, breadth kind of thing. It's like just describing. Oh well, this thing has a certain size and volume, and it fills up a certain space, and I can write a mathematical equation for how much volume is the green part and how much volume is this part. So what? The mathematics doesn't say anything, again, about how it was built, where it came from, how it's constructed, how it functions. It doesn't say a damn thing about any of that shit. It's just so meaningless.
Overlay pictures of reality on those abstractions. And we're not too married to the idea than asking what real, you see, because in overlaying, we don't do a good job. We just overlay more abstractions. And forget to
and again, they're not. Most of the mathematics is not an abstraction. It's just simple variables that have quantifiable substance that can be measured. That's why they're variables, and all they do is like to do word problems. They just want to keep doing word problems. Like, well, if Mary weighs 400 pounds and her little red lamb weighs 58 pounds and she sits on a wolf that weighs 74 pounds, what's the crushing force of Mary on the wolf? I mean, it's just silly. That's all. They want to spend their time playing chess. They don't want to understand how the chess got invented, what the function of it. They just want to play with it. And that's all it is, okay? I mean, most of physics is just doing math problems as if they're accomplishing something. Let's find something stupid. Let's pick any random stupid thing in the universe and say, well, how do we figure out the total volume of this pen? How many derivatives can we write? And how much bullshit can we go through to figure out what its volume is with only one variable, which is it weighs 17 ounces? I mean, it's just, who cares? That doesn't explain reality. Doing word problems. Solving questions nobody's asking. They're not answering any of the questions that matter. They're answering questions that don't matter over and over and over again.
To an actual concrete reality that could be in conformity to these rules, but actually do things and yield the results we see. And
so as I've demonstrated, you can take a very simple mechanical process that merely creates high and low pressure very easily by just having two forces and two matter bits that interact to those forces. And I've explained how all the complexity can be created through that simple mechanism. That you just can build and build and build on it, because it can create high pressure, low pressure, high pressure, low pressure, and create systems that can be very sustainable. And I've described all of that, how it's doable, it's done. I've already done it. I've already provided you a better explanation of magnetism. I provide you a better explanation of gravity. I provide you a better explanation of time dilation. I provide you a better explanation for every single phenomenon we observe that's meaningful, and you're just pretending I never provided those explanations when I did. And you don't have any explanation that's superior to them. Again, show me the more complete and more simple explanation of magnetism than the drawing I gave you.
I said there won't be one mechanical schema that fits this to my mind. But
right, to your mind, it can't be a simple universe. It can't be made out of sticks and stones. Well, I'm saying to my mind it certainly can, and quite obviously you've provided no evidence of how my system fails. Every time you bring up some kind of crap like Stern-Gerlich or this or this or this, I find the flaw in your logic, saying that this experiment demonstrates something. There's people going to argue, you know, when I get to comment videos, some idiots telling me that electrons are dipoles. Where's the evidence that an electron is a dipole? Where's the evidence that an individual electron has a dipole moment? It's an idiotic notion. There's absolutely no evidence that electrons go positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. They don't have any dipole fucking moment. They're always negative. They stay negative. They're always negative. It's just idiotic. There's no dipole moment for an electron. This is an idiotic notion. Where's your evidence? They're the ones with a complete lack of evidence. I keep pointing out how they have no frickin' evidence. The evidence is weak, and he will not concede the point. The evidence is preposterously weak, and he is such a dishonest cunt that he won't just sit there and admit it. It's so fucking weak. It's non-existent. The logic doesn't exist. I point out how the interferometer beam splitter idea doesn't even work. I point out how they have no consistency. They don't explain the two patterns in the double slits experiment. They don't explain why the little things are round or why they're rectangles. They don't explain anything. Why the diffraction gradient is images at different locations. None of this is explained by their stupid physics. Oh, he's just such a liar.
Just the acknowledgement that this is the way it is. You know, DraftScience's ideas about metaphors of dancing partners, of dancing and time dilation in this aspect is
multitasking, okay? The simple argument is that if something has velocity, it changes its physical structure, and the more you change its physical structure, the less it's able to do the other stuff because it's in the process of changing. Change means it can't do what it was doing because it's doing something else. It's multitasking. So yes, whatever thing you were timing it based on how fast it decays. Well, it's not going to decay as fast when it's moving, because its processes are going to have to slow down for it to do the moving part. if a circle processes the circle, moving around the circle takes a longer time because the circle is bigger now. When you process a circle, it's like stretching a circle. It means you've lengthened the circle. That means it has more circumference. So the circle takes longer to go around the more you process it.
It's a good idea. But I think that idea and the idea of true conservation of movement that he describes in terms of being an explanation for momentum and inertia is also a good idea. But
meaningless words, because you heard the but. So meaningless. They're just absolutely meaningless. Yeah. And it's not about whether it's a good idea. It's about whether it's closer to what would it is more supported by evidence. It's a more complete explanation. It's a simpler explanation. These are the things we're looking for. We're trying to describe the truth. It's, in my opinion, the statement is it's closer to what would one think the truth would look like.
I believe DraftScience attempts to implement a schema, a mechanical schema, is...
See, he's doing these as live videos, so the audio gets fucked up if the bandwidth goes down, so it's not my fault. His videos does suck. The video quality.
Too simple and killed.
So it's too simple. You know, by what standard? Where did you make up the rules of what can be the simplest, the nature of the universe? So again, just more bullshit. Just a statement that doesn't mean a damn thing. Where did you get this statement that it's there's a height requirement or it's not fat enough? What does too simple mean? If it works, that's the only standard, and you haven't pointed out where it fails at all, except to cite just mystical. Oh, there's experiments that don't fit. The experiments. And again, every time I go to one of those experiments, do a little research on it, you find out the experiment's fundamentally built out of a million fucking assumptions by the person doing the experiment. Unproven definitions of causes and effects that they haven't never proven that it actually comes out 50-50, or this actually does this, or this actually does that. They're all assumptions. But those assumptions are okay. I mean, his double standards are just so gross.
It fails because I'm not prepared to accept.
Yeah, that's all. That's the only reason why it fails, is because you're not prepared to accept. That's period. That's it. You're done. And it's not because of any rational reasons. It's just because of your own irrational reasons. It has nothing to do with fairly weighing evidence.
That science is so experimentally wrong.
Again, where am I saying the experiments are wrong? The only thing being argued is when you have a highly complex experiment that you might have some wrong assumptions in that complex experiment, right? But where am I denying the outcome of the double slit experiment? Where am I denying the outcome of even the interferometer? I'm not denying the pattern. I'm not denying this. I'm explaining to you why the cause isn't what they say it is. So again, you just keep changing the goalpost, changing the subject. You keep perverting this into some sort of thing where I'm disputing the evidence. No, I'm not disputing the evidence. I'm disputing the interpretation of the evidence. All right, they see an on-off pattern. They say it must be wave interference. Every time an on-off pattern shows up anywhere, the simplest pattern in the universe. You don't think that's a little bit juvenile? To always assume, you know, nothing else can create the simplest pattern in the universe?
Because it's a simplistic approach to...
Again, there's nothing simple about it in the sense that it obviously took 7 years to put it together in a form that can work for everything, that can explain a lot of phenomenon, because there's a lot of phenomenon to explain. There's the motor effect and this and effect and that effect and all these other effects, magnetism, electrical effects, and now it does all of that. And so again, this complete denial that yes, it is simple, but the fact is that it does fit the evidence. And you're You're misparaphrasing it by somehow implying that it isn't consistent with the vast majority, the volume of the evidence. Yes, it's not consistent with idiotic notions that photons are bent by gravity, and the evidence for that is shit. Okay, and it's not consistent with some notion that photons are entangled, and that evidence for that is shit. So again, you're just being such a cheater. You're just cheating the truth here, because you will not admit when evidence is junk. The evidence for a conclusion is garbage. The Eddington experiment was garbage. Will you look at the experiment and admit it's in a marginal experiment, even in ideal circumstances? And we don't have ideal circumstances. We have a 10% view of the universe. So his photographs are 10% of what his expectations were. And he had a very difficult task. If he got 100% of what he was after, he still had a difficult job to do. And somehow, miraculously, he was still able to do the job on 10% of the information. Oh, doesn't that seem a little bit unrealistic? No, you can't even say that. You're so fucking dishonest.
Giving a mechanical schema that conforms to those principles and gives other things, it leads to too many maybe back in the day there weren't so many
it leads to too many weggy. I don't know what he fucking said, but it doesn't lead to any problems at all. And as I'm pointing out, it's getting better and better and better and better. It answers all the questions, and it answers them completely. More completely, let's just say. I mean, obviously I can't answer all of them completely, but it's certainly more complete than virtual photon bent space bullshit.
Really, things that I recognised that contradicted current experimental predictions, and
so as again, there's no experimental predictions. There's quantum mechanics. They haven't predicted a motherfucking thing. So it's just such a lie. They went to Las Vegas, they watched the roulette wheel, and then they predicted that the ball will fall in one of the holes. That's their prediction. It's a prediction any idiot could do. None of their mathematics ever predicted anything. Okay, ever. It's a description of effects. That's all it is. They watch it do something, and then they write a formula describing what it does. They see something, they define its shape, and then they make a mathematical formula to accomplish the task. But it has nothing. They don't predict any of this crap. They didn't predict the ultraviolet thing. They didn't predict any of this crap. So it's just such a lie to say they predicted something. They predicted nothing.
Plausibly has been done, but there's some degree of faith in that. But I'm not, just because he's perhaps correctly pointed out that the which way experiment as often...
So you keep pointing out this one. I've pointed out a ton of stuff that doesn't fit. I've pointed out to you that their mathematical equation that's supposed to be the generic tool that fixes all, that in one circumstance it's measuring an opening's width, and in the next circumstance it's measuring the impediments width. You don't see a flaw in that logic? I've pointed out how in one theory they say photons interfere with themselves, and in the same theory they say no, photons interfere with each other. A huge contradiction. Which one is it? You don't demand anything from their nonsense. They just sit there and feed you a bunch of crap, and you sit there and accept it. Well, that's your liability. And again, I'm just pointed out on your grave, whatever, the whole thing. I'll just say, look, what an asshole. This is what's wrong with human fucking beings. They're so fucking dishonest. You can't sit there and honestly say, yes, their theory is shit. It's just garbage. It doesn't fit. Doesn't work. It's not mechanically sensible. It's completely irrational. And it's made out of sit there jumping to conclusions, jumping way ahead of their evidence. They get a little tiny bit of energy in one of their accelerators, and they start declaring new particles. And then they declare that they're anti-particles, and that they annihilate each other when they meet each other on the street. I mean, they make up whole fucking big giant stories out of absolutely nothing. And you won't sit there and admit that simple fucking truth when it's so fucking obvious. Dark matter exists for no other reason than their math doesn't work. Their notions of how the thing works is wrong. They don't understand galaxies. They don't need to invent dark matter to fix it. They just have a wrong understanding of how the damn thing works.
Portrayed and most egregiously portrayed in Dr. Quantum, as he laments. As
I lamented 6 years ago. I mean, it's an old argument. I've pointed out a whole bunch of more flaws in their logic. I've pointed out how this beam splitter idea doesn't work. I've pointed out how our eyes don't see light the way we think it does, and the distance doesn't change the actual size of things. I pointed out a ton of fucking things.
really been done in that way, there's too many other experimental disagreements.
So there's too many other experimental disagreements. Just a lie, right? I just sit there and say, go ahead, link me to your stupid fucking experiment. And yes, if the experiment's going to take me 6 months to figure out how it works, well, yeah, I'm not going to be able to critique that because I'm not going to waste 6 months on one stupid experiment. But we know those are all going to be these stupid probabilistic, marginal experiments that claim that photons are entangled or some other bizarre bullshit for which they'll never glean anything, right? We're never going to have one of these quantum computers, and you goddamn know it.
He has. Only to find it plausible that he's found a mechanical schema using these good ideas he has that conforms with also the experimental.
So again, I go to the trouble of showing how every experiment I can explain why this affects that, why the wires move into each other, why this happens, why that happens. I'm explaining all these experiments that are out there. He keeps throwing new ones at me. Like I said, he throws Stern Gerlach. Doesn't even have, you know. Frankly, the documentation is pitiful. The most popular image of it is an animation of the experiment, you know, frankly, which is pretty lame. And I gave you a perfectly coherent explanation of what I think the cause of the effect is, and it has nothing to do with magnetic moments or any of this other nonsense. And now from that experiment, they're claiming that somehow electrons have a magnetic moment. Again, where's the evidence that electrons do? The only evidence is that silver atoms bounce, you know, as silver atoms come out of the experiment in a certain way. Where's the evidence that anything else is affected? No, there is no evidence. And yet he says, I have an inconsistency. My theory is inconsistent with the evidence. No, there is no fucking evidence.
I think the character of those ideas will play out ultimately in some.
So some idiotic notion. So again, this talking out of both sides of your fucking face and your ass at the same time. What the fuck does that even mean? Oh yeah, I think you're right, but you're wrong. Oh, you're completely right, but no, you're completely wrong. No. I mean, just what is this nonsense? Oh, I think the kernel of his idea is correct, and blah blah blah, but it's wrong. Well, fuck you. This is just babble.
Mechanical explanation for quantum mechanics and the rules of reality.
Yeah, the rules of, like, gravity, for example. Again, you accept this idiotic thing. The stupid bent spacecraft doesn't even work in 3 dimensions. The stupid idiotic notion of a pull force, which was a stupid idea right from the beginning. They should have said, no, pull is stupid, it's retarded, it's dumb, it's not elemental enough, it has to be pushed. I mean, come on. What game are you playing? You're convinced. You really think gravity is a pull force. You really think so?
But as I said, DraftScience, I don't believe is onto.
Yeah, you really think it's just spooky action, that the atoms inside of me really aren't being affected by anything real, that transfers momentum, that they just by themselves, through spontaneous momentum generation, because the Earth says, come to me, they go down. No force required. No mechanical mechanism whatsoever. So either tell me that you think it's strings and ropes, or concede, yeah, it's probably some kind of momentum coming from the outside.
The details of those, of how that plays out. So he might have.
Yeah, whatever. So, yeah, the more I provide details, the more you ignore the details. So, again, what's the point? I go research your stupid experiment. I see what it says. I give you the proper explanation, the rational explanation for how it functions. Again, show me anything close to the video I just did on magnetism in the subjects videos, the 30-minute, show me anything close, anything even close to that as a description of magnetism and how it functions. Show me anything produced anywhere that is anywhere near as simple and as complete as that explanation. It works beautifully.
Well, the jigsaw pieces are nice, but it doesn't seem to be fitting together to my mind because of the experiment.
It doesn't fit together with what? Because of experiment. You keep saying this word experiment. What fucking experiment? They've never done any speed of light experiments. They've never done any of these stupid experiments. What experiments? When did they take a light clock into a spaceship and go half the speed of light to prove any of this shit? Where's the experimented data proving any of it? Right? I've already explained why the GPS thing is the way it is, and you know, you have that idiot dissident science douchebag saying they don't use general relativity in GPS. Well, of course they don't, because it's a tiny factor. It's so small, it's insignificant, and it's in the opposite direction. So, frankly, that's the irony of it, right? Is special relativity puts the onus on the thing in the gravity rather than the thing in orbit moving the faster speed. So the special relativity says the gravity is really important, and the general relativity is saying exactly the opposite, which is what we see as visual motion matters. When, again, I've pointed out how neither one of them is getting the motion question correct, because the real velocity is the velocity of the atoms. The real velocity is the velocity of the electrons and protons. And the electrons and protons are, frankly, being affected by both forces. They're not doing the composite thing yet. Okay, they have to do it. They're in the process of doing it. And being in the process of doing it means they're doing a lot of processing, which means they're doing a lot of moving to come up with the end product, to do the math, to create the new vector of velocity for the big thing. They have to do a lot of moving around, which means their velocity is very high. I explained, I tied it all up. I made sense out of those two theories. I made them into one theory of motion. Very nicely, very neatly, very completely. Cunt.
Predictions, and because of that he doesn't have experimental evidence to show.
I have the same fucking experimental evidence. Again, I'm describing the experimental evidence. I'm going through the experiment and explaining why it's the effect, what's causing the fucking effect. I have the same fucking experimental evidence. Einstein doesn't have any experimental evidence. I've already pointed out that the thing that put him on the fucking headline of the New York Times is a bullshit experiment. It's so fucking marginal, even theoretically marginal. And then as a practical matter, the guy who did it said, I would not stake my life on it. So you just deny that as a statement? He wrote in his own fucking journal, I wouldn't stake my life on the results. Yet that made Einstein a national hero. So what are you talking? An international hero. So again, what are you talking about? Me having evidence. They don't have fucking evidence. Where's the evidence for dark matter? Where the fuck is the evidence for that? Where the fuck is any evidence for anything called a bent space? Where the fuck is the evidence for that? Where the fuck is the evidence for their fucking virtual fucking photon, which they don't even know how to give it properties of plus and minus, because they have no way of doing that. How do I make a baseball that you throw at something that makes the thing come to you? Oh yeah, I can't really do that. So calling it a virtual photon, where's the photon? Where's the notion of a photon that, oh yeah, you shoot the photon at the thing and it comes towards you? Is that a realistic notion of a photon? No, it's not a realistic function. So obviously they have no clue how this thing really works, you frickin' lying sack of shit. They have no evidence.
The contrast between what is taught and what is said to have been done, and what is actually done, perhaps, I don't know.
Oh yeah, well again, you just can't admit they're perpetual and preposterous liars when they say they predicted anything. Again, that's like me going to Las Vegas and predicting, I predict the ball will fall in one of those holes. I predict it'll be red or black. I get a Nobel Prize for that prediction because I watched it happen over and over again. I figured out, oh, it's a 50-50 chance. There, I predicted it. They don't predict anything in the real sense of the word predict.
For example, as I said back in the day, a couple of years ago, I couldn't see anything but fantastical experiments or prediction differences that the layperson couldn't hope to do. But it's come to light relatively recently. One commenter about the idea about if lights are particles, and that, why doesn't it come out of the microwave holes? And in Mendham's DraftScience's idea is that they're just two aspects.
It's polarized. That's right. I took something that everybody accepts exists. I'm giving you an explanation for what polarization is, which is the energy is spread in a direction, okay, based on the motion of the thing emitting the energy, and that polarization can be affected by aperture size. Lines are holes.
Aspects of a particle of light, a photon, is a pair, and that they're displaced. So they get separated when going through an aperture.
Well, right, but the aperture is functioning right like the... So if I made a grating to put in front of microwaves, right, we could polarize the microwaves and I can move the grating, right? Because it's polarized. So we know that the light bouncing around inside the microwave oven is going to be mixed polarization. So how do you filter something that has mixed polarization? Well, you're not going to do it with a bunch of bars, but that's going to let half the energy right through to burn you, right? So yeah, you put a hole in, because what's the hole do? It does what the bars does, that turns into squares. So now you've blocked both polarizations. The holes just happen to be a filter that blocks both polarizations.
Liable to get separated. I think there's something very testable there, and I think for each
testable again. See how? Obviously, I'm not going to have the instrumentality to do that. Do you think that okay? Let's say 200 years ago they did experiments where they made statements about conservation of energy because they put a rat in a bowl of salad inside of a glass vial and sealed it up and let it breathe and shit and do all that stuff and drop dead. And then they talk about energy conservation. Well, that wasn't really an exact experiment, right? That what they were really doing was just doing a very rough approximation of the energy conservation, because they weren't accounting for the energy going through the glass and all kinds of other stuff. So, and obviously this amount of energy is tiny, okay? And so how are you going to, again, as I've pointed out, this is huge. Gravity is a hugely powerful force, hugely powerful. The amount of microwaves it would take to move this like that, okay, is a lot of fucking microwaves, a lot more microwaves than my oven's goddamn producing. So again, how am I going to detect this broken pieces of energy? Well, what instrumentality do I use? Because I've already pointed out, the only way we measure anything on the electromagnetic spectrum is based on the fact that it jiggles electrons in a certain way, a very specific way. As I pointed out, it's very specific. Not any old jiggle will do. We can't detect electrons doing this. No, they have to jiggle in a certain fucking way, or we have no clue energy hit them. Fact.
Hypothesis. More work has to be done on figuring out how it can be tested and undertaking that test. Then, that might encourage other amateur scientists such as myself and to replicate those experiments. And then you get a body of evidence.
Yeah, yes. Well, I had a guy who was supposed to be doing the jamming experiment, and whatever, he just can't, he can't get to it, or his health is not good enough, or whatever happened, so it just didn't work out. But yeah, I don't personally have a bunch of sophisticated electronic equipment to do a complex experiment detecting a tiny amount of radiation at a higher frequency. Yeah, I don't have the equipment to do it. But I'm just saying, theoretically, the argument is it fits. You can't say it doesn't fit the evidence, because it does fit the evidence. It's exactly the same mathematics for jamming as it is for an interference pattern. Okay? Exactly the same math. Because it just has to do with this geometry and phase. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, this is just a phase argument, okay? Period. Not complicated. You say you know what the truth is. I'm saying the evidence is murky, and you won't even concede that, well, yes, theoretically, both theories have evidence. Both theories could be the truth. You won't even admit that. You won't even admit that the experiment they've done didn't prove wave interference. And it certainly didn't disprove, okay, because they used the audio signal instead of using just detecting the actual transmission of the frequency, that they certainly didn't disprove jamming.
For a new point of view, perhaps. It's just struck me now that would be a claim that there's a certain amount of lossage through any grill, yeah, that light intrinsically gets split up by a grill,
Yeah, well, the important thing is yeah, it diffracts, it bends in different directions. So obviously we can't receive the light because we only can receive light going in certain directions that head for us. So the more it is spread, the more likely it's going to get to us, and the more likely it's going to go somewhere else. So yeah, you put a screen in front of something, it looks like it's a lot dimmer than it should be, right? The amount of openings are bigger than the amount of closure, yet the light is cut way down. Well, that's because so much more of the light is going over there and over there. So if you're standing someplace else, you'll see more light over here when I put a screen in front of a light coming at me here. So if I'm somebody standing over here, okay, and I put a screen up, this guy's going to feel more light. I'm going to get less. But it all goes somewhere. And some of it obviously goes into the screen and heats it.
A lot of apertures or a single aperture. And
I've pointed this out with polarizing films. Again, they're the ones with the technology. They're the ones with hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies from all kinds of foundations and the government, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of tools. And they're the ones that don't do these experiments. But I mean, is it that complicated to do the polarization, light polarization thing and just point out, well, here, we have a polarizing filter. I'm going to shoot a certain amount of light into it. I'm going to get a certain amount of light going through it. Well, what happens to the rest of the light? How much heat is in the polarizing film? Because if all the other half of the light's energy isn't in the polarizing film, then where the fuck is it? Did they ever answer that question? Did they ever do the experiment? Again, it's not my fault that physics hasn't done any of these elemental experiments. They haven't had any curiosity, because just like you, they've had a stupid assumption. Well, it can't be something simple. It's got to be magic, and mathematics is the only thing important, and entanglement's important, and silly things are important. But let's never do the basic experiment. Again, not one single experiment ever to see how much energy is captured by the polarizing film. How hot does it fucking get? None. No experiment. They never even thought to do the experiment. That's how they just couldn't give a shit about understanding the basic physics. Why does that filter work? Anybody who asks that question, honestly, it's going to occur to them, well, the energy's going somewhere, right? If the light's not getting through the fucking filter, if half the light's getting blocked, what happens to it? And if it goes into the filter, it reflects off the filter, I should be able to measure that. And if I can't measure enough heat and enough reflections, then I have to account for where the rest of that energy went.
There must be a test there to check that the orthodox science prediction about the loss through apertures versus the loss through aperters in a draft science.
So again, but the real problem is we just don't have instruments to detect these broken pieces. Again, as I've pointed out, the photo detector is a really sensitive piece of instrumentality. But the point is, as soon as you do make it sensitive enough to detect these little half pieces of energy, it goes off all the time. Because it starts picking up all this energy that's around us all the time. This gravity energy is dense, thick, full, complete. I mean, and it's full of little broken pieces of stuff. It's full of a little microwave heating here and there, and a little photon, a little visible, little piece of X-ray, just a little piece. It's full of it. All right? So there's no way to make a detector that's going to be able to clean all the noise that's out there, that's going through and bombarding it all the time.
But other discrepancies or disagreements come now with...
I mean, I could argue that this thing right here is radiating some visible photons. All right, it's not just reflecting. I could sit in the dark with this thing, and because it's warm, it's likely radiating a bunch of visible photons. That is visible in theory. I can't see them because I need 6 nodes. But they only have 3 or 2 nodes. Okay, they're small hunks of photon, small pieces. And maybe a frog can see them. I can't see them. But the frog would see visible light coming off of this object. Not reflected light, visible light from the heat. There'd be some X-rays that actually come off of this thing. All kinds of different energy is being emitted by this thing because it's hot. Relatively speaking, it's hotter than frozen.
With DraftScience says that you can tell, the speed of light might be a maximum, but you can actually see that sunlight, if you travel fast at it, you'll get the speed of light plus your speed. Yeah? No,
I never said any of that, so that's just a lie. All I said is if you're shooting light from this distance, it's going to take longer for the light to get to the other person than if you're moving. Okay, if you change your distance in the time it takes for the light to get there. I shoot the light from, we're here. I shoot the photon. The person's moving as the photon is moving. Obviously, it's going to meet the person sooner than it would have if the person stood where they were. So if you're just going to measure it based on time, how long did it take for the light to get to the guy? Well, clearly, it's going to seem like the light went faster, but clearly the light didn't go any faster. He just changed the position. He changed where the goalpost is, for fuck's sake. So again, just don't misparaphrase me. I've emphatically and aggressively argued you cannot change the speed of a photon. You cannot make it fast. You cannot make it slow. You cannot add anything to it, and it cannot have two fucking momentums. It cannot fly to the future.
And that has been tried a lot. It says in standard lectures, it says lots of people have tried that and nobody's been able to devise an explanation.
Again, it's bullshit. Nobody's tried it. You can't do it. So what are you making these silly arguments for? First off, it's hard as hell to even measure photons because they're moving so goddamn fast. And yet have a moving experiment measuring photons. You think that's a practical thing to do? I don't think it's a very practical experiment.
Experiment that shows that. Yeah, but a clear prediction of DraftScience is that, in a sense...
So liar. My prediction is, there's nothing in my prediction that predicts light ever moves faster. The prediction is clearly just an obvious prediction that if you move closer to something, it'll hit you sooner. If you move towards a baseball, somebody throws a pitched baseball at you, and you move towards the pitcher, the ball will get to you quicker. That's my only prediction, fuck liar.
The distance, when two pieces of light travel towards each other, they approach each other, the distance shrinks at 2 times the speed of light. Well, on a lower level, a train, a rocket, or whatever, then it's c plus the relative minus direction. Yeah. The other prediction he has is this.
Again, this goes right back to the light clock. His prediction is that when the light clock is going back and forth in a spaceship moving the speed of light, that somehow the light clock photons go forward. For no reason whatsoever besides he says so. That they don't go straight, which means as the ship moves away from the photon doesn't hit the same target, it hits lower on the wall. It doesn't really go lower. It's the ship moved. Obviously, if the ship's moving, the photon is shot, the ship is moving. Obviously, it's going to not hit where you aimed it, because the ship is moving while the photon is moving. Clearly, it can't hit that spot. You think it does, by magic, and magic alone. No physical explanation for why, just a magical notion. I say so. The other physicists think so. There's no experimental evidence demonstrating so. Not a single experiment saying that happens. Yet you claim it's some sort of legitimate belief you retards have.
This jamming effect, the detection of microwave interference is a failure in the equipment to see that you actually got double the energy at the point. One of the experiments in the series I'm watching, The Mechanical Universe.
So what's your point in bringing that up? My point is clear. There's no more evidence. Jamming is not a less complete answer to the question than wave interference. I'd argue it's a more complete, but regardless, it's certainly not less complete. It's certainly not less indicated by reasoning and logic as an explanation. And you're claiming it must be interference. How do you know that? Why is interference given the preference? For what reason?
Just mention something simple like different diffraction levels and the splitting of light through a prism, seeing the colours of the rainbow. Also, another prediction that...
So I don't even understand. What's so hard to predict? Again, the surfaces are uneven. I've already pointed out how that's the angle of diffraction. All of the reflections happen on surfaces. The angles are created on the surfaces. There's this stupid, idiotic photons move slower argument. It doesn't have anything to do with the reality. They're not moving slower. They're being transmitted, through distance again. You have to understand the photon doesn't fly through empty space in the atom. It has to be transmitted from electron to electron to electron to electron to electron. So it's slowed down a little bit.
So I'm interested to what that explanation is in DraftScience theory.
No, I've already done the explanations. I've pointed out how the electron is moved, out of its position. It's in a position with other electrons. It's in tension. Okay, and so it takes a certain amount of impacts to knock it out of its tension, and that's the same thing as a tipping point. So if you hit it at the right cycles, you'll increase the motion of the electron. If you hit it with the wrong frequency, you won't increase the motion of the electron because the electron will be moving this way when the photon hits it, and there'll be a dead reaction. There won't be any adding to the motion in the tension of the electron. I've made this clear. It's elastic. It's inelastic. It's moving, okay, with a resident frequency. I've used the word 17,000 times. And if you're off resonance, it's destructive. Okay, you you don't conserve the energy. You don't save the energy. You don't trap the energy if you're off phase. So I've made it clear why, yes, the ultraviolet light will create a different frequency vibration in an electron than the infrared light, which will create a very different frequency, and the difference in the frequency is going to make the difference in the angle that the fucking the photon is re-released at. Not complicated at all, yet you paraphrase it as shit. You dishonest piece of crap.
It also occurred to me, prediction is that one of the quantum predictions is that when you charge a gold leaf electroscope.
They never predicted it. So again, who predicted it? They did the experiment and said, oh, look, that's curious. Nobody predicted it ahead of time. So again, let's not lie again. Lie some more about what would happen. Nobody predicted it would happen. They did the experiment. I wonder what would happen if we shine, photons onto this very lightweight electrostatic objects. And we already know that ultraviolet light, right, from the staircase thing, whatever that electric thing is, we put two antennas at an angle, and the electricity travels up the staircase. They already found that if you shoot ultraviolet light into that experiment, you will increase the likelihood of it going up the staircase. And it's clearly just because, yes, the ultraviolet light creates ions. That's what ultraviolet light does. It ionizes the atmosphere. So all you're doing is creating more ions.
Gold leaf electroscope, yeah, I think that's it. Doesn't sound right. Electroscope, yeah, I think so. The gold leaf electroscope, where you charge it, the phenomenon is that argues for quantum nature of light.
Right, and you can also do it with a candle, okay? So you don't even have to hit the gold leaf with the ultraviolet light. You can just hold a candle next to the probe. Okay, just hold a candle, because the candle creates ions. Duh!
Is that you can shine regular light at it, even the laser pointer. You can shine multiple laser pointers at it, and the gold leaf electroscope.
Right, and regular laser light doesn't create the ions, right? So this is something we know. We know that ultraviolet light creates a lot more ions than infrared light. That's just a fact, okay? And it's about this frequency thing again. You have to have the right frequency to eject electrons from the atoms to create a physical ion in that sense. An electron positive or an electron negative. In this case, obviously, electron negative. And so I just pointed out how that's a tipping point argument. That you could shoot bullets the wrong frequency all day long, and all you'll end up doing is getting this much wobble. You shoot them at the right frequency, and you'll get a gigantic, wobble, and you'll knock the electron out of its orbit. I mean, it's a perfectly complete explanation. All right, and you're pretending it's not, and it perfectly answers the question of why the difference in the effect, why I can put 10 infrared photons on it and get nothing, and I can just put one ultraviolet photon and it works. Well, it's because the ultraviolet ones are at the right frequency, and it's important, the frequency. It won't tip at the wrong frequency.
Electroscope leaf would stay up. Yeah, it's negatively charged. The whole thing it pushes away, but you can kill that negative charge by ultraviolet light. Will cause the electrons to jump off and it will go down. In DraftScience's theory, I guess you should be able to put multiple lasers on the gold leaf electroscope.
So a complete lie. Again, I've never suggested that. Every time I've explained the difference between ultraviolet and infrared light, I've pointed out the same argument. I've never suggested you could take more and more infrared light and turn it into ultraviolet light by some magical way. No, you can't. It's the wrong frequency. It can't be made into the right frequency by pumping more of it. More wrong frequency doesn't make the right frequency. So again, just a preposterous lie, misparaphrase, whatever. Not even close. Again, the tipping point argument couldn't be any clearer. He's saying that somehow he doesn't understand. That almost goes back to Lever. I mean, this goes back to 2,000-year-old physics, tipping points. He's saying he can't understand the argument. Okay, that I can push on it. Like, say, if I'm trying to push a car out of a hole, I can push. I don't have to create a frequency for the motion of the car to get the car out. I can just push in any random way I want to, and it's going to work. So even though the car is moving towards me, I should push on the car. I shouldn't wait till the car stops and then push on it. There aren't some fucking mechanical rules to how you push a car out of a hole. I mean, it's that fucking simple. The analogy is that goddamn simple, and this fucker can't paraphrase me correctly. He's making an honest mistake? No, he's making a dishonest mistake. His fucking mistake is he's a religious fuck who believes in their wooey magical bullshit. Okay, he has some sort of, you know, he thinks because, oh, Suskind said the word information and it gave me a boner. What the fuck's the logic here? I don't understand. Why do you have so much respect for physics too stupid to figure out I can analogize electrons to a wheel stuck in a hole? And the only way I can get the wheel out of the hole is to create a resonant frequency. It's that fucking obvious. And you have respect for these douchebags that can't even notice that.
The overlapping of intensity of light should be able to do the similar thing. But in quantum theory...
No, it shouldn't be able to do a similar thing. So again, that's just a lie. So again, I've said resonant frequency 7 million times. Nobody logically thinks that resonant frequency means nothing. That it means I can hit it with any kind of balls, any kind of way. It doesn't matter. I don't have to make it constructive to the motion. I don't have to be constructively affecting it. Okay? When, of course I do. I have to push the car when the car is moving in the direction I want it to go in. If I push it when the car is moving the opposite way, I'm just burning energy for nothing. I'll get nowhere.
As it can't, and it will not. And presumably the experimenters, they tell you that, but they don't say they do it with laser, but they say they do it with intensity. They turn up the intensity of light, regular light, and it doesn't cause the gold leaf to drop. But when you shine ultraviolet on it, boom, it drops. It knocks the electrons out of metal.
It creates ions again, so it's just so fucking obvious.
This is an experimental difference of opinion.
No, there's no difference of opinion. So again, just a grotesque lie. I've never said anything. Go find the quote where you could misunderstand me in such a way. Never, any time I've ever talked about this subject, have I ever implied that I could just keep pushing a bunch of wrong ways into electrons and I'm going to make them do what I want them to do. No, that I can just force them with just tons and tons of infrared radiation and I can make them act just like an ultraviolet photon hit them at the right frequency. I've never suggested any such thing. I've diagrammed it. I've sit there and meticulously gone into this whole explanation that the electrons are in tension with each other, and you know the motion will all have to move through the system, and it's the only way it can be constructive is it has to be at explicit frequencies. You're just such a fucking liar. I gotta check. Oh no, it's only 1 o'clock. Real time versus what time I thought it was. Well, I'll take a short break anyway, just to check. Alright, should be back. I have a business appointment and such.
Predicting, where DraftScience likes to talk about a kind of resonant wobbling. The more you impact, the idea is that eventually you can get a thing to tumble over.
Yeah, no, it's not the more you impact. So again, you don't even understand how resonance works. Even though I explicitly explain how it works, is that the idea, like the whole theory is based on this idea of trapping momentum. Well, the only way you can trap the momentum is you have to collect it in a direction where it will add to your momentum, not subtract from it. So if you throw the baseballs at the you put a stick in the ground and you throw baseballs on to wobble a big piece of wood. You have to hit. If I throw the baseballs when the wood's moving this way, I'm going to undo what I did when I hit it the right way. I'm just going to keep undoing what I did before. So I can't have destructive interference. I can only have constructive interaction. So I always have to throw the ball when the motion is in the direction I want to add to, or else I lose the energy I put in. I've made that explicitly clear, liar.
Whereas quantum mechanics says definitively it's nothing to do with the time period of it.
It said something definitive, which is just such a fucking lie again. They can say nothing definitive, so just lie some more. Like they have any right to make any definitive statements based on any fucking thing called real evidence. They have no idea how photons work. They have no idea how electrons work. They think electrons, again, have are swirling around, 400,000 miles an hour. They think all kinds of wacky shit. All right, so their theory makes absolutely no sense at all. How could a ray of ultraviolet light hit the same photon if the photon's moving 486,000 miles an hour, or meters per second?
Impacts that it can either take in this piece of energy or it can't do, and it's either enough or it isn't enough. There's no amount of increase in the intensity of the frequency of the bullets in the regular sense.
And again, I've never suggested otherwise. I've clearly pointed out I fully understand the experiment, douchebag. And again, you'll find no quotes from my video. So go find the video. Go find a quote from my video where I implied anything else, I said anything else, or I drew anything else, you fucking liar. I never drew anything else. I never suggested anything else. And I clearly pointed out how it has to be unresident. If the frequency ain't right, it ain't happening.
That's going to cause an effect. So I think it's a good idea for DraftScience to start categorizing.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. You just stick your head into the fucking goddamn dirt and have your dog bury you properly. Bury the duty that is your brain. Because you're a shithead. You're just a fucking goddamn shithead. I mean, this is just such bullshit, this preaching to me about what I need to goddamn do. From a guy who has no evidence for what he says, no reasoning backing it up besides, I don't like the simple idea, I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. You're just doing a Donald Trump. I mean, it's just a fucking ignorant, stupid, vacuous explanation of how I'm wrong. And again, every time you have challenged me, I have risen to the challenge and demonstrated where you made a fucking error, jackass. Every fucking time.
These and listening and making videos on these different predictions that he's making, and I think.
And again, how do we do this experiment? How do I disprove that the lensing experiments, right, that are theoretically impossible, their own images are theoretically impossible? There's no mathematics that makes any sense. So they have to use dark matter, fake matter, to fix it, to make it make any sense gravitationally. So they can't make it make any sense gravitationally, that these three little objects are somehow creating spherical gravity. They can't even make that make sense. It theoretically is garbage, and you're telling me that I have some mountain to overcome. No, their theory is already garbage. I shouldn't even have to deal with it. It's so stupid. It doesn't fit. It makes no frickin' logical sense. It doesn't fit their own theory. It's absolute nonsense. Okay, the evidence doesn't support their own theory.
To support his theory, he has to do those experiments have to be done by him to say he has evidence for his theory beyond a story which fits in one aspect or several aspects.
No, I think we already have a ton of evidence. Okay, all we have is shitty, irrational, jump the evidence, nonsensical multiverses. Just jump to the worst and stupidest conclusion, the wackiest conclusion possible. Never, 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 never consider the clearly obvious mechanical one, like in the radar example that just clearly jamming just jumps right out at you and says, well, obviously the signal could be jammed. How are you going to detect two different radio sources if they're out of phase? What radio on Earth can do that? Show me the radio on Earth that can detect two different signals out of phase at the same frequency. So two signals that are equally strong coming to a radio receive an antenna, just a straight antenna, no directional antenna, a straight antenna, and show me any fucking example in the history of mankind where with that straight antenna you're able to receive two different signals at exactly the same frequency, 90 degrees out of phase. Show me where you can do that, jackass.
because those different predictions are to say that his story doesn't fit the regular story completely, because there's a difference in prediction.
So again, he says it doesn't fit because there's a different prediction. So he cited predictions that I never made, complete canards and lies, that somehow I said light moves faster, and never said that, and that somehow I said that electrons aren't ejected based on a specific frequency, when that's exactly what I've said. So just lie some more. Why don't you show me an electron with a frequency? Why don't we show me the experiment that proves electrons have a frequency? Why don't you do that? I don't mean electrons you gave a frequency to. I mean you shot them at a pulse. I mean just a regular electron flying on its own. Why don't you show me where its wavelength is?
Yeah. So you have to find out who's right. You have to do the experiment, which is supposedly different. You do enough of those, and then your theory...
Well, again, they haven't defended their theory with what I would argue is real hard evidence. So again, their theories don't match what they say the instruments are doing. They've never given me a description of this interferometer and where the interference is. So it's all just based on a bunch of made-up nonsense. And you're saying that's okay. They can make up nonsense. They can just make up a model that fits the evidence that exists. I'm not allowed to do the same thing. My only obligation is to fit the evidence that exists. I don't have to do anything else here, Dumbo, except come up with a theory that's more rational and simpler. So I've obviously given you the simplest models you could possibly dream of. 2 force bits and 2 matter bits. It couldn't get any fucking goddamn simpler. And it answers all these experiments. So where have I failed to meet my obligations? Those are my only obligations. My only obligation is to explain how jamming fits. Why do I have to prove it? Let them prove it. Let them prove their theory. They never proved their theory. They just made up their Huygens shit, and they made up their photons interfere. Yeah, I don't know how they do it, but they do it. They just made it up. How come they don't have to prove anything? You're just such a fucking duplicitous hypocrite.
Experimental evidence becomes the supreme theory, because you have a description of the new phenomena.
There's no new phenomena. So again, just more horseshit. There's the same old evidence. I'm giving you the rational explanation for how it fucking goddamn happens. Not the ether bullshit, not the perturbations. I'm explaining to you why magnetic field lines there's no energy moving around the magnet. I've explained all this shit. Their stupid, ignorant, 300-year-old nonsense explanations are garbage. And they were never evidenced by anything.
That's allegedly been missed.
Now, I haven't missed anything. I haven't fallen short of my obligations. You have fallen short of your obligations as a fair cop to recognize they never proved anything either. They never proved any of this crap. Proof is a little hard to come by. Again, there's the small stuff in the universe, but I'm just saying that the logical, all I'm saying is I can beat them on the evidence that already exists, because my model is rational, theirs is silly.
So yeah, that's the last video of today.
Pile of turd. But they were all a pile of turd. Every single one of them. Big pile of turd. Why do I bother? Anyway, so till the next time and such.